Welcome to the Bike Shed podcast, where we talk about all things software engineering and spend at least 10 minutes arguing about whether this counts as engineering at all. I'm your co-host, a guy who writes quality commit messages but outsources his PR descriptions to Claude, Scott K. And alongside me are my co-hosts, a man who trusts his gut, his tests, and absolutely nothing that came out of an LLM, Matt Hamlin. And my other co-host, legend has it, he shipped a feature no one asked for, got promoted for it, and still hasn't stopped talking about it. Dylan Spicy Take Curry. Dylan, Matt, what do we have for a topic today?
All right, Scott. Today we're talking about routers, or I guess routers if you're in a different country than free America. We have a mixture of sort of router related news, and then we'll also talk about, like, we're talking about different kinds of routers here, but than maybe what most people think about. But yeah, we're talking about router related news, and then also, like, what is a router, why you might need a router, what's the benefit of a router. So I guess before jumping into the news, let's maybe define what router is in this context. A router, much like every other sort of instance of router, but a router in like sort of AI speak, is basically a way to route different requests to agents to different backing models behind them, right? So you have one prompt that you send, and then there's a router that prompt goes through, and then it decides which model it should be like sent to, and which model should respond to it. So basically every like model inference company is already using a router, but it's maybe not talked about as much. I think maybe most people's common occurrence of this is if you're using Claude Code and you send a prompt, for example, to Fable, and that prompt is decided to be something that, like, maybe Fable shouldn't be responding to, like a cybersecurity related topic, it will downgrade and send that request to like Opus 5, I think now. Used to be Opus 4.8. So behind the scenes, like, Anthropic would silently send your prompt to a different model than the one you're asking it for example. But outside of the big sort of model provider companies, there's a ton of different little startups that are offering sort of just a generic router, in the sense that you can sort of send your traffic to this router, and it will decide if it needs to send it to OpenAI for a GPT model, to Anthropic for a Claude model, to some other backend provider for a different model, depending on your use case. So that's like the gist of what a router is. And recently in the news, these things have been sort of like popping off as becoming like maybe equally as important, maybe more important than the various inference provider companies, because they provide a lot of flexibility to companies to, like, sort of pay one subscription and get the benefit of a variety of different model types. And so, maybe we jump into the news segments here, or yeah, I guess, like, maybe I'll let you guys interject if you have anything that maybe I'm describing it improperly or something like.
No, I like the idea of a router, but I
I
feel like
remember.
yeah, go ahead, Scott.
No,
What do
you
you
go ahead.
remember? No, you tell me what you remember after I say this. I feel like companies are going to use it maliciously to make you spend more. Maybe that's just the conspiracy theorist in me.
They're probably gonna use it to route you to some crappy model that you don't know you're using, and they're gonna tell you it's a
Exactly.
frontier model, right?
Yeah.
I just remember us talking about this at Fireworks, and I thought it was like, at the time they talked about, and I may have mentioned this in past pods, but basically, um, they had a theory that frontier models can, well, they didn't call them that then, but basically, like, these catch-all models that can do everything are unlikely to be like realistic, whereas like a router that can map the right prompt to the right model that can be like small and really well tuned is ideally or likely a future that is realistic, which seems like we're kind of living in that future. I will say that I have also noticed that I feel like businesses were trying to tune their own models in the past. And what I've kind of noticed is it seems like a lot of that has gotten offloaded to the actual AI companies themselves, because I think tuning is actually like a really high cost problem space. And it seems like more and more, like every company I hear, they have like an Anthropic subscription and an OpenAI subscription, and they've kind of offloaded the cost and engineering constraint of having engineers do that all day to get these kinds of frontier models. And now we're talking about like the inference providers mostly bringing in like this concept of having a router route to different models, and how do people feel about that. So I don't know, I'm just giving a little bit of background and my thoughts on it, but I think logically it makes a lot of sense to get like the best um, solution to things and allow people to focus on small models that solve the right problem. It's obviously a hard thing to make sure things route correctly, but whether or not companies will be nefarious, I wouldn't really be surprised. Call me a pessimist.
Yeah, I feel like there's maybe two different groups in the sort of like AI space at the moment, and most people probably don't realize that they're in one of these two groups. But there's sort of like the group of people that have the perspective that the frontier models are good enough at everything that we're asking them for, and that it's not really worthwhile to do the like sort of split my request across different models and like have different models that have different strengths solve for those strengths. Right. So like there's the people that just say like, oh, just throw it at Fable 5 or throw it at GPT 5.6 Sol Ultra and it'll be good enough. And then there's maybe the sort of the other group where it's like, actually, if you fine tuned and like trained or like fine tuned a model or like trained specifically a model on specifically just triaging error alerts, for example, as like a very specific use case, and like it does really great at that, but is like really shit at everything else. That is actually worthwhile doing because it's going to outperform specifically on that use case than every other model. But it does cost a little bit more currently. So I think there's this sort of this spread or like sort of dichotomy there in the ecosystem, and routers sort of lean towards like that second group of people where you can route a request to those fine-tuned like specific models to solve those specific use cases. So maybe before we jump too far into like benefits of a router or like why you might want a router or things like that, two sort of interesting, slightly newsworthy, one more recent than the other, sort of topics that have popped up recently is Stripe has, I think, either closed the acquire or like is in talks to acquire OpenRouter. OpenRouter is probably the largest startup that does like that operates a router at scale. In fact, we know a few people that work at OpenRouter. Actually, man, it probably would have been a good idea to bring them onto the pod, but this is sort of a last minute topic. But yeah, so I think it was like something like 9 billion for Stripe to acquire OpenRouter, which is kind of crazy. And then the second thing in the news is that we have this financial services company called Ramp, and they're launching their own router as an alternative to OpenRouter or these other places. And so it's interesting that like a few of these companies are either acquiring routers or going out and launching their own, as opposed to maybe what 90% of the industry that has adopted AI is just saying like, oh, I'll buy from Anthropic or I'll buy from OpenAI instead of using these router solutions. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess like curious to get your guys' reaction on those news trends, or or should we just dive into sort of why you might want a router or
Immediate reaction to what you just said. It sounds kind of crazy to me that a company to me, it just feels like looks at your prompt and then decides, oh, here's the model you should use. And now you have access to every model versus if you're on OpenAI or Anthropic, you're kind of limited to a certain set of models. I'm surprised at how much they're valuing that sort of, I don't know, setup of like taking a prompt and then distributing it to the best model possible. Like that doesn't sound like a very difficult problem. Like, are they just using an agent to then they take your prompt, give it to an agent, and ask the agent, "Hey, what model should we use for this?" But maybe there's more to it. I'm pretty like limited on scope of knowledge around this topic.
I actually think the and sorry, I probably missed a little bit of what you're talking about because of more technical problems. I actually think that OpenRouter isn't really doing that much that's like intelligent in terms of every request of like sort of passing it through a like sort of a judge and determining what model to send it to. I think they do offer that kind of product, and if people know better out of our listeners, like feel free to like chime in and let us know where we're wrong. Um, I do think, yeah, I do think it's like costly or prohibitive currently to have something that's like I don't know the right phrasing or terminology, but like have like some sort of like judgment agent that sits at the router and determines like, oh, this kind of prompt usually gets better results from this other model, so we'll send it there. Like you sort of have to know that kind, like you have to like, I don't know, you have to do some interesting problems to like solve there to like make it efficient and operate at scale well. But I think at the moment they're just sort of like you can maybe like configure percentage of your prompts that go to different models, or you can maybe like in your request to the router, like you can say, I want to send this to a specific model behind the router. My hunch is that like the primary benefit that maybe Stripe sees is like they want a single gateway to manage all their AI traffic, but then also like a single place to like tune where those requests need to go to, instead of needing to like juggle like either an internal router that goes out to external services like OpenAI or Anthropic or wherever else. And like manage all that infrastructure on their own, like sort of offload it to this company like OpenRouter. Um, yeah, for example, at HubSpot we have like this Light LLM gateway. Light LLM I think is like a relatively popular Python package that acts like a router as far as I know. Um, and so we've like deployed that internally, and then sort of all of our requests go through that gateway, and then that goes into sort of forwards along to OpenAI or to Anthropic or Amazon Bedrock or wherever we're hosting different models and things like
Yeah, I can see the value. Like currently where I work, you can use Cursor, you can use Claude Code, you can use ChatGPT, but it's all separate applications to interface with any of it. And it's slightly different when you're interfacing with it. And also there's no sort of limits baked into any of those tools, which puts like a weird I don't know, it's makes it feel a little bit weird of like how much is too much, and they don't really tell us until we hit a certain number and they're like, "Hey man, chill out." But I feel like I would prefer if there was some sort of pre-baked limits daily on certain models potentially. So I could feel like better about using those models. I'd be like, "Oh, I know I only have a $100 allotment of Fable per week or per day or something." I would be more interested in using it in that case. But now it's like I don't really want to use it that much because I know it's going to rack up the bill really fast, and I can't like I'm not really sure if it's worth it. So I can like see that those features would make using these tools a lot easier for an org.
that. Yeah, and I think something that we've noticed at HubSpot is like there's a large audience of people that sort of assume that they're going to get the best result by using, for example, like Opus 5 or Fable 5 or GPT 5.6 Soul, like these really expensive models. And actually, in practice, if we sort of like obfuscate the model that we're actually using behind the scenes, like they can't tell that we're maybe using GLM 5.2 or whatever it is, like to generate the response, and like they see it as good enough as if it were those like sort of high end sort of models or frontier models. So I feel like that's another benefit of router is like not necessarily that you want to lie to, for example, internally in your org to engineers of like what model's being used. Um, but it is an interesting case where it's like if these engineers didn't have that experience, or like like they sort of need some way to like be told actually that there's a cheaper model that derives just as good results. And like a sort of a router provides like a nice interface that allows organizations to control like like where like how much different models are being used, or like what models can be used versus others. Um, so it provides, I think, a lot of like smart levers for organizations.
Are you using OpenRouter? I don't know if you mentioned that already.
I don't no, I don't think we are. We have and maybe this is like spilling too much of the internal secrets. I believe we shifted over to Anthropic's sort of like enterprise offering for any Anthropic models. Um, and so I think those are like that's going through that system, and then we use Light LLM for everything else. So that's like a open source package that we deploy on our infra that allows us to route to OpenAI models or route to Amazon Bedrock for if we're like self-hosting like GLM models. I assume we're like handling those. I think like Kimi K3. I think we're like sort of behind that Light LLM gateway was going to base 10 maybe, which is like sort of another inference provider like Fireworks. Um, yeah, so we're not using Open Router as far as I know.
Well, that's the first time I've heard of a light LLM as well. I'm like curious if we're doing anything like that or looking into anything like that where I work.
I got a few questions or a question. When you say that you're using like some sort of router, is that router for engineering devs who are writing code, or is that like are you using routers within your applications for AI specific features where folks might, your customers might be asking a question, maybe it's a chatbot or whatever. How does that play
Yeah.
out for you?
Well, both in our case. So we are using a router for unless you're using the Anthropic models, like as an engineer at HubSpot, you're most likely interfacing through that Light LLM like router. But then also if you are a customer of HubSpot and you're using Breeze, like our agentic sort of surface across the product, then it's going through a router also that allows us to control like which model is actually providing responses for those requests.
So on the dev engineering side, like, so I don't think we might. I have to like investigate if we have any sort of routing. But I know that like lately, because I've been using Pi per your recommendation, I can just pick a model in our Amazon Bedrock and I'm just running with it. So it doesn't sound like, well, at least in that case, I'm being mapped to any sort of router. So does that routing layer, like maybe, I don't know if you know this answer, would that routing layer be before Amazon Bedrock or after? Or I would assume it would have to be before it, because we would have to manage it, and then whatever goes through Amazon, um, routes to that LLM.
It's sort of like maybe an it depends case.
Yeah,
In your case, you're probably not using another router. Like Bedrock probably has a router, but it's like a very basic router, right? It's just like
sure,
you like on the request from Pi, for example, on your machine, it like sends some information that says I want this model, right? And so like
sure.
Bedrock says, okay, a request from Airbnb to their deployment wants
It's
this
not like
model,
a
and it does that.
it's not like a smart router that's like, okay, he's
Right.
asking a question. This model's not good at it. Let's route him here. Yeah,
I
interesting.
wouldn't be surprised if Bedrock supports a lot of the same functionality and features that, for example, OpenRouter supports. I personally haven't like messed around with that, so I wouldn't know if it does. But I'm sure that they probably have some controls, right? I'm sure your engineering leadership at Airbnb has some control to say, actually, we don't want or maybe we want to limit the number of requests that go to Fable 5 deployed on
Sure.
Bedrock, and so like they maybe some Amazon sort of admin page allows them to go in and say, no, like here's the limit on requests that go to Fable 5 per week or whatever it is. I'm sure they have something like that baked in.
Yeah, that's probably be an interesting question if they how we handle that.
Yeah. I think Dylan dropped this in the notes, but I think like a good way to conceptually understand routers is for folks that have used it, Cursor has like an auto mode feature, um, which you just send, as I understand it, you don't really configure a prompt or a thinking level. You just sort of send a prompt, or sorry, you don't configure a model or a thinking level. You just send your prompt, and Cursor decides what model under the hood should be used for that. And the same thing for like spinning up sub agents, where it's like maybe they use Composer. I think it's 2 now is the latest version they have out, for like the main prompt, and then sub agents. They spit up in like a lighter weight, like a smaller model that's easier for it to handle, which is the same how like Claude Code handles it for subagents and as well as GPT. Like Claude Code spins up Haiku usually for subagents just because it's more efficient and doing like a more scoped problem. So those are kind of like examples of a router in practice. Um, yeah, I think we'll probably see that the second half of 2026 and into 2027, routers will probably become a larger thing, especially as like we talked about in our prediction episode, where companies are going to be employing more AI, but they're also going to become more fiscally conservative with their AI expenditure. Um, and I think routers give them that a nice like sort of balancing point of we want to limit expenses on sending requests to Fable, for example, and so we're going to employ some gateway, some solution that allows us to limit how much how many requests we send to these larger frontier models that cost a lot of money still versus cheaper maybe open source models, but maybe still frontier models, but like Luna, for example, on GPT 5.6, where it's pennies compared to some of the larger models to do some of the same work, basically.
Do you guys have to manage your own spend, or do you have limits?
We don't currently.
No, we have the same thing going on like you, where it's like if you do something wildly crazy, they might be like, "Hey, calm down," but we don't have a limit.
We have a like a leaderboard.
We had that. It went
And
away
it's
because
still, I can see everyone's name. So as long as I'm like not in the top 10, I feel like I'm good. That's how I've sort of managed my spend.
So it's like a shame board now instead of a leaderboard.
I'm not really yeah, I feel like if you're like top 3, it's a shame board unless you're doing some really, really good things for the company.
I did get pinged recently by someone. They were like, "Oh, you're in one of the leaders in AI. Can you take this quiz thing?" I'm like, first off, I don't believe it. Like, I don't believe it because I'm not like I'm not that crazy. We have some folks who are like migrating like everything, and they're just like taking it to extremes that have been like, "Hey, cool down a little bit." But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was supposed. Yeah, that happened.
All right. Do you guys have any further thoughts here? Do we want to do stand up? I feel like it's been a few episodes since we've done a stand up update.
My sort of hot take on this, it's not very hot, but I think I would prefer this be the way that we work with models. Is it's sort of just automatic. You just get the right model for the task, because I don't think we should be spending our day bike shedding over what model to use to do each task. That's the name of the podcast, by the way. Bike Shed Pod.
for the listeners, we played a little soundbite because Dylan said the name of the podcast. I agree. I think there is this maybe interesting. I don't know. It's like a interesting challenge where it's like I think engineers in particular always sort of want to know, the implementation detail. Always want to know, like, be able to say like they're using the best tool, right? So it's like very hard to sell to other engineers. Like, actually, you don't need to use the frontier model for this problem. Like another model, like an open source model that's cheaper to run is actually just as good. I feel like it's always hard to convince someone of that. Where it's like they see the branding, they see all this stuff about Fable being the best and whatnot, and then like they're sort of like bought into like that has to be the way I solve my problem instead of being more open to like actually these smaller models or cheaper models are just as good for the problems that they're solving at least.
Honestly, I don't even trust these companies. Like, if I use Fable or Opus, that they're gonna. Why would you trust them? Scott's laughing at me. Like,
I'm
if you
laughing
use,
because I like kind of agree.
it's just like I use Opus. They're probably using Haiku. Like, when
Well,
I
you
ask
probably
for
would
Opus,
know. Haiku was bad at some things.
I don't know. Like, they could be just using Haiku, like in certain cases.
Yeah.
And telling you it's Opus, charging you for Opus, and like, why wouldn't they do that? That seems like the best way for them to make money. So that's probably already happening today. Hot take over.
All
That
right,
wasn't a hot take.
let's transition to our stand up updates.
I'll go first. I was working on a project. It's done. It took forever. I wanted to like quit my job after. Don't tell anyone. Um, no, it was mostly because I was burned out. I think the burn is cooling off, which is good. I took some time off. Been playing some chess, which has been fun. Got this smart chessboard that I mentioned earlier that allows you to like learn on a real board, which I think is a lot more fun than playing online. Like, I played versus my wife last night. It's pretty cool. You can like enable different settings as you're playing, so it'll tell you like if you play a move, it'll tell you if it was a good move, a bad move, an inaccuracy, like after it's played, which is pretty sick. And then you can enable like hints. So like if you touch a piece, it will tell you all the different places you can move. So I'm just having a lot of fun with this thing. I just got it. And then other than that, yeah, that's it.
Well, I'm working on like 5 things at once. We're managing to get at a point where it's we're almost done with our phase 2 features. Which phase 3, my team's tech lead has decided we will not be just calling it phase 1, 2, 3. That's boring. So he's come up with some witty titles for our phases, which is exciting. But I noticed end-to-end tests are failing after making them not fail this morning. I'm actively built a PR to like allow us to maybe have a CI build kite pipeline that will check against preview deploys of whether or not our end-to-end tests are running and failing. Because I have to barter with web platform on that one, but it seems to be like a non-standard. Everything just goes to staging and then it fails there, and then it doesn't escalate to on call or anything. We just have folks at deploy. It's in my opinion a nightmare, and I'm freaking out about it. And every morning I'm fixing end-to-end tests, so I'm working on that. It's going well. Going to Portugal, not next, like kind of next Saturday, not this Saturday. So excited about that. So hopefully we'll have a podcast before that, but let us pray. We'll see. But don't eat lettuce. You might die in the United States. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm still very, very motivated this week. I had a little bit of burnout, like Dylan was talking about, but I'm feeling really excited. I wrote some really cool UI stuff. I was pretty stoked about it. I don't really write UI anymore, which is, I don't know. I don't really write anything anymore, but yeah, if you know what I mean. But basically, yeah, it was nice to add a little bit of my own touch to making the app really, really awesome. So, Matt, your turn.
All right. Yeah, it's been interesting at work. One of our coworkers just left last week or the week before. Now it's basically just me and my principal eng that are working on the team. And then we have like sort of our sister team that we're gonna kind of like rejoin back with potentially. So that's fun. Outside of work, I've been doing a ton of playing of Big Walk, which is like probably the game of the year, maybe game of the decade. Um, Highly recommend to folks to check it out. Play it with your friends. It's a ton of fun. And then today is the beginning of, this is maybe the date when we record the episode versus when we release it, but today is the beginning of the closed beta for Modern Warfare 4, which I'm pretty excited for. They're bringing back DMZ to this game, although it's not part of the beta, unfortunately, so we have to wait until October for that. But yeah, that's exciting. And then not next week, but the week after, we're going to Norway for a few days. Stayed in Bergen, so I'm gonna try to get a reindeer hot dog while I'm there. So looking forward to that.
I'm dying to go to Norway. You don't even invite me or tell me about it. I find out this way. This is like so insulting.
You're in Portugal. We can't. You gotta fly up and meet us.
Maybe we will. We can all stay in
All
an Airbnb together.
We are staying in an Airbnb there with two
Thank
other of our friends. So
Keeping me employed. Oh, what? You're inviting other friends? Dylan and I were like chopped liver. Wow, unbelievable.
Yeah.
all right. Thanks everyone for tuning in this week. Remember to leave a review of the episode and the show on your favorite podcast network. We appreciate 5 models out of 1 the most. Remember, if your app doesn't let you do it, then it's a bug on their end and not on ours. Feel free to join the Bike Shed community Discord server to connect with the other folks in the tech ecosystem, share your thoughts with us and the other listeners. You can find a link to that server, as well as all our episodes, transcripts, episode summaries at bikeshedpod.com. Bikeshedpod.com, all one word. If you enjoyed this episode or other episodes, feel free to share it with friends. And also let us know what you thought of the topic. What do you think about routers? What do you think about AI models? What do you think about AI in general? We would love to hear more from folks. Otherwise, see you potentially next week. Peace out.
Later.
Later.